Hi there, welcome to my channel. I hope you're doing well. There's nothing worse when working on a scene for however long and then setting off a render and walking away only to find out sometime later that when you've come back and had a look, you've actually missed a little bit of poke through. Now, poke through is where a little bit of the model's geometry and the clothing geometry intersect with each other and you get a little bit of flesh poking through where there should be cloth. Now, it can mostly occur with ill-fitting clothing or after a deforce simulation has ran and some of the clothing geometry has gotten caught up within the model's geometry, which, it results in these little small snags, causing the frustrating results that you can actually see on the screen right there. But don't worry, there are a number of ways that can fix the issue, and I'm going to go through 5 of the best ways that I deal with poke through. Now, I'm saying 5 because not every solution is viable in every situation, and as we'll see later in the video, we sometimes might even have to mix and match various different methods to get the results that we want. But whatever the case may be, these 5 methods, either in and of themselves or a combination of them, will get the job done. Now, also as a bonus, right at the end, I've included another option if you don't mind spending a little bit of cash for not only one further method to beat poke through, but as a general tool, it's something that's becoming nigh on invaluable to me at the moment. So make sure you stick around to that. Right then, before we start, if you haven't already, then make sure you hit the subscribe button and the little notification bell down below so that YouTube will let you know when I drop another video like this one or any of my other DAZ 3D tutorial videos. Also as well, if you like what you see, then also consider hitting the like button down below, as this lets YouTube think I'm actually better at this than what I actually am. And what that does, that increases my views because it puts the video out to more people. And both of those things help out the channel, so if you do those things, big thumbs up, and I appreciate it if you really do. Finally, as you can see, we have, as usual, a model already booted and suited in the scene. She's a happy young girl, and details of which you can find down linked in the description below, as always. So without further ado, let's get on with my top 5 ways to beat poke through. Well, it's not really cheating, but getting poked through isn't a disaster, and it can always be fixed quite easily in most cases in your favourite paint package. Here's our rendered image that I've got in Photoshop with the areas of poke through of most concern circled. Now, it's very easy in a paint package to clean up the image and remove the poke through. All I'm doing is just using the clone stamp to constantly create copies and then pasting the background materials into the gaps where the poke throughs occurred. And after a little bit of effort, the result is that you wouldn't have even noticed there was any poke through there to begin with. Now, as I say, I'm using Photoshop here, but if you don't have Photoshop and have access to another paint package like, I don't know, GIMP, I think it's open source, then you'll be able to find the equivalent tool to clone stamp in that package and you'll be able to do exactly the same. I'll leave a description down below to GIMP. So you can use that if you've not already got it. But ultimately, poke through isn't a disaster if you miss it before rendering, as fixing it in post-processing isn't really a big deal, other than it adds a little bit of extra time and effort into your workflow, which obviously we can always do without. And certainly, of course, if you're doing a number of images. Ideally, though, you'd want to eliminate poke through pre-render. So let's get to it properly, yeah? Now, the first method that we're going to take a look at to try and get rid of our poke through that we've got is a smoothing modifier. If you don't know what a smoothing modifier is, it's something that we can apply to clothing and materials, hair, anything like that, which attempts to iron out any crinkles and any creases that we don't particularly want in the underlying geometry. Of course, that therefore lends itself well to poke through. Most items of clothing come with a mesh smoother added by default, but not all of them do. And if your particular item of clothing doesn't, make sure you've got it selected up in your scene view. Come up to Edit, down to Object, down to Geometry, and then down to Add Smoother Modifier there and give it a click. Now, it won't let me add a second one because this dress comes with one automatically. And once the Smoother Modifier is there, we make sure our dress is selected in the scene and come down to our parameters tab, and you'll see this little mesh smoothing option down here what you've got. What you'll have to do is make sure that it's enabled, so make sure the enable smoothing is set to on, and then what you want to be looking at is you want to be looking at smoothing iterations, which is at a base default of 2, and you want to be looking at collision iterations. And what you need to do with that smoothing modifier is just one by one just start pressing and increasing the number of iterations. Now, as you can see there, I've only increased the smoothing by 1 there, and it's got rid of a big chunk of the poke through straight away. But keep alternating between smoothing iterations and then collision iterations to try to get rid of all of the poke through. Now, a little bit of admission here that it doesn't always fully get rid of everything all of the time. Eventually you run into a wall of diminishing returns, and sometimes it even goes back on itself if you go too high with one of these. As you can just see, there's all these little dots that are still present there on the dress, and it might be a problem to get rid of all of them. Like you can see there, we've actually reverted. Oh no, it's just my computer being slow. Bring on my new PC. So as you can see, yeah, these little dots, and it's a bit diminishing returns because these will just flash on and off all the time. Sometimes you'll set one setting and you'll kind of clear it up. You'll up then another setting, it'll bring some of them back. I think as it stands at the moment that this is the best that we're going to get. It's not fully sorted out the breast, and it's just left these couple of little dots here and there, which we're probably going to have to clean up in Photoshop in truth. However, if you've only got little small areas of poke through, these are quite large. If you've only got little small areas, the smoothing iterations or the collision iterations could actually clean them up at times. So don't be afraid to use this method. If you've only got little outbreaks of poke through, with big ones, maybe you'll have to use another one of the methods. The second method that we're going to have a look at to try and get rid of poke through is by actually looking at the clothing adjustment morphs that come with our clothing. Again, with our dress selected, if we come down on the parameters tab down to actor, you'll notice that normally in most clothing, the creator of that particular item of clothing adds a lot of these adjustment modifiers. Now, don't get confused with adjustment modifiers and pose modifiers. The adjustment modifiers are there just simply to adjust the shape and the size of certain areas of the dress to accommodate the shape of the actual model that we're using. Now, as you can see here with the Magnifique dress, there's a lot of these adjustment sliders that has been included. Not every single item of clothing will come with all of these adjustments. It's just down to the individual taste of the creator. Some come with a few, some come with a lot. There's quite a decent amount here that seem to cover all aspects and areas of the dress. As a catch-all, you've always got at the bottom this something like expand all, which will increase the size of the dress entirely. Don't confuse that with scaling, but it just increases the size of the dress across the board. So all you need to do is look at where your particular areas of poke through are. We can see we've got one here on the right hip, we've got one over on the left side, and of course the one on the right breast. Now we can see here that we've got 4 actual adjustment morphs for the breast. So again, just in small increments, because we don't want to do too much. If we just start increasing a couple of these, start increasing each one of them, and what this will be doing, it'll just be sizing in the cup area around the breast. Now this is actually going a little bit slow, so I might have to go a bit quicker and a bit bigger jumps. So if we just start coming through and just start raising these individually, and try to find the one that we're going to be needing. It looks like it's going to be breast 1 is the big one. And as you can see there, just by changing this, adjustment slider, we've kind of got rid of now of all the poke through there on our right breast. If we come down to the hip, there's one we can see down here, adjust hips. We can probably start increasing that now. And again, just keep on going with it. And there we go, we've taken the poke through away. There's a little dot there. I'll just try and get a little bit more out of it. There we go. And again, then over on the side, the hip one's actually affected that somewhat, but we probably need adjust side B maybe, or adjust side L for left, I would guess that means. So if we now just start, is that actually having any impact? No, that's not having any impact. That's not the one I want there. So we've just got to try and find the one that applies to adjust abdomen maybe. Let's have a look. Yeah, that looks like the one. So again, we just up the sliders, the morph sliders, keep on going. A couple of little dots there until eventually get them rid of them little dots, hopefully eventually. Yep, and there we go. We've taken away all the poke through just by using the adjustment sliders on the dress itself. Now again, as I mentioned, not every single item of clothing will have every single possible adjustment slider. But just have a look at what you've got and try and use what you've got as best as you can. As I say, as the catch-all, you'll always have an expand all, but that of course expands the entirety of the dress, and it's a bit OTT expanding down here on a leg when it's just up at the top, say on the strap or the breast for instance, that you'll want to do. But yeah, adjustment sliders, that's the second method that we've had a look at to get rid of poke through. Now, the third method we can use to get rid of poke through pre-render is to apply a push modifier to our dress or our item of clothing. Now, using a push modifier on an object is very similar to using a smoother modifier from a couple of options back. But unlike a smoother modifier, a push modifier isn't applied to an item by default when you load it up. So you actually have to add it on, and we do that in exactly the same way that we do a smoother modifier. We come up to edit, we come down to object, we come down to geometry, and then we come down to add push modifier. And when we give that a click, it asks us to give us a name. Now, what a push modifier does is that it thickens the material of the dress or the item of clothing that our model's wearing, increasing the thickness of it, thereby filling in the holes that are there in poke through. It's not to be confused with scale. It's not to be confused with expand all from the adjustment layers section. It just thickens the material and gets it really quite thick actually on high sliders. So you've got to be careful not to go too high because it can really distort the look of the dress. Now, when we click OK here on the push modifier and we apply it, the slider will be set to the default of 1, which is quite thick, which I think is like 1 centimeter thick that it makes the material. And we're going to want to reduce that. So once we click OK, you can see now that the dress has expanded thickness wise and it's covered up all of our poke through, as you can see. But of course it looks as if it's distorted in the areas around the straps, and if it wasn't so black, maybe in other areas we'd see. So what we need to do is make sure our dress again is selected. We come down now to the general section, and there you will see something called mesh offset, and it's called push modifier up there, and as I mentioned, it's set to 1. What we want to do is come down to 0 and then to incrementally just start raising it bit by bit. Try 0.2 now, and that doesn't seem too bad. We've got to take it from 0.1 up to 0.2, and it seems now to have removed all of the push modifier, all of the poke throughs. I can't really see any little dots or anything on the breast that's out, and it's cleared there just with a couple of steps up. You've got to be careful that you don't want to go too high with this. If you're getting into 0.3, 0.4, 0.5 areas, then it's just thickening the dress way too much, or the item of clothing way too much, that overall your image is going to look rough, and you'd probably have to use a different method to do it other than the push modifier. So yeah, as long as you can keep that number low on the push modifier, you should be, he says, should be okay as long as you can keep it low. If it starts getting high, then you're probably going to have to use a different modifier because the dress will just expand. I mean, if I just go crazy on the dress further up, you can just see now it's starting to get, again, that really thick material. But if you can keep it low, push modifier, I use that generally all the time myself, and it's my usual go-to method to getting rid of poke through if the next method doesn't work. Now, before I get to the number 1 method that I use to get rid of poke through, I did promise you a little bonus, so I'll just do a little quick shout out for a tool or a plugin that's becoming my number 1 favourite almost now in DAZ, and that's Mesh Grabber. I actually created the poke through in this example by using Mesh Grabber. It's a little plugin that appears up on your tools menu once you've got it all turned on. I give it a click, I come across into the tool settings, and I get this little these options that you can get in here. And what you're able to do with the mesh grabber is, if I just pull this slide down here so it doesn't affect things too much, if we were just to click on the dress in the area of the poke through, we get this gadget come up, and it's extremely big there, the thing. We get this gadget, and what I'm able to do is just to pull around the mesh. As you can see there, we've just pulled the the poke through out. If I again click on the dress and go on this little bit to poke through, and again I'll just pull out the mesh by using the widget that we've got. And again, now we've got rid of that little bit of poke through. There's a little bit there actually that we've left over. Again, just make sure I'm on the dress. A little bit there, which just looks like a underwear that's poking through. And we'll just give it a pull, and then we come up to the breast once again with the dress selected, and we'll just pull out the dress, and there we go. In next to no time we've gotten rid of all poke through just by using the mesh grabber tool. You can't just use it for poke through. You can use the mesh grabber for hundreds of different things. As I said, it's becoming one of my favourite tools of late. So for instance, let's say we wanted to raise the dress, we can just give it a click there. I'll just increase the sphere a little bit so we affect more of the dress, and then we can just pull up, and as we can see, we're just affecting the dress now, and we can get the dress in whichever shape that we want it to be. Just have a play around. Now, of course, what we could do is we could pull the dress right up. We could then move the arm and pose the arm differently and have it as though she's pulling at the side of a dress up. So yeah, mesh grabber, it's one of the methods that I do use for poke through at times. I haven't got it quite fully there. It is one of the methods that I do use for poke through at times, but as I say, it's becoming one of my favourite tools. So if you haven't already, take a look at it. You'll find a description down below in the a link down below in the description. I just thought I'd give you that little bonus. It is a method to remove poke through, but now we'll get on to my number one method that I always use. An old wise man once said, if geometry is hidden, then it can't be seen. And those wise words certainly apply themselves to DAS, and especially when it comes to poke through. If we again have a look at our areas of poke through, we've got a bit on the hip, we've got a bit here on the abdomen, and we've got a bit over there on the right hand breast. If the geometry of the model in those areas was hidden and it was turned off, then of course there'd be no model, no geometry, and thereby no material of the skin to actually poke through. And this is my number one method. I always use this method first and foremost before anything else, and I only use the other methods if I can't get rid of poke through completely using this method. And that is just by turning off the geometry underneath the areas where the poke through is occurring. So if we come up to our model and we just expand out a little bit the skeleton, we've got a little bit of the geometry here on her hip. Well, it's actually, that's probably the pelvis area. And so if we come up to where the pelvis is on the skeleton of the model and just come across to the little visible icon over to the left and give it a click, we give that one click and then bang, by magic, the poke through disappears. And the reason why it disappears is because the geometry isn't there. If I just turn the dress off for a moment, you can now see that there's absolutely no geometry in the area where the poke through is occurring, and so therefore nothing can poke through. And likewise, if we come over to the geometry here on the abdomen, I'm guessing that's going to be maybe upper abdomen, so we'll try upper. We'll turn that off. Okay, there's still a little bit there. That's probably from the lower abdomen. We turn that off and we remove both areas of them poke through just by turning the geometry that's underneath off. Now, look, you should really get into the habit of turning off geometry that's hidden by clothing, because not only do you remove the effects of poke through, as you can see there, but if that geometry isn't there, it speeds up your final render. There's a video you'll be able to find up there in the top right hand corner about hiding geometry and speeding up render times. So you can get two little things in one here. Take off the geometry of those areas that you can turn it off to avoid poke through, and speed up your renders in doing so anyway. However, we've got a little bit of a problem. That geometry is still poking through up here on a breast. Now, if we were to come down to the pectorals part of it and turn off the right pec, Great, we've got rid of a bit of the geometry, but as you can see, we've also turned off the, we've got this great big hole effectively now in our model's body. So you've got to be careful, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, not all these methods apply in every situation. But if you can't, so if you're going to end up being able to see a great big hole, or, if again we take off the dress, if I can find it again, where is it? There it is. It's fine, this area, removing this area, because it's covered entirely by the dress. But of course, when we take away the right pec, it's poking out here above her bra that she's wearing. So we can't obviously use the hiding of the geometry in this instance in all areas of this poke through. But yeah, always get into the method of hiding the geometry that's underneath clothing. You will get rid of the poke through, and you'll also speed your renders up. Incidentally, this is what games do when you see people wearing clothing in games. They're not actually, rendering the legs of somebody who's wearing a pair of trousers. They remove them. They don't render them. All that they do is they render the trousers, because then they can avoid any poke through issues, because there's no skin to poke through the actual trouser model, or in our case, the dress model. So yeah, always get into the habit of removing the underlying geometry that exists on your models, that lies under clothing and it's fully covered by clothing. You'll remove all poke through, and it'll speed up your renders. Now, with the breast area, we'll probably therefore now have to use one of the other methods. I would possibly use, I'd probably first of all go to the smoothen modifier, not the smoothen modifier, the push modifier. Then I would look at adjustments. Then I would look at smoothing if all those things don't work. But first and foremost, always hide the geometry if you can. And so there we have it then. Those are the methods that I use to make sure that poke through isn't a bane of my life, and it isn't a pain in the backside like it can be. It's not the end of the world, as you can always resort to the paint package, as we mentioned earlier on, but using one of those methods or a combination of those methods should remove poke through from your renders for good. Each method won't work in every situation with every item of clothing, of course, but a mixture of them, or one or the other, should be able to get rid of all the poke through for you. One thing I keep reiterating, always will hide your geometry. It does get rid of your poke through, and of course it will speed up your renders. If you've liked this video and you've got something out of it, then please consider giving me a like down below, as that helps me out massively, as it tells YouTube that I'm better at this than what I actually am, and it will bring more viewers in. Also, as well, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and hitting the little notification bell down below, as that will help me out on the channel massively. And finally, if you've got any questions, whether it's about poke through, whether it's about DAZ in general, or you just want a little chat, drop a comment down below and I'll get back to you as soon as I possibly can. So that's it for now. I'll catch you next time. Bye bye now.